And these principles are generalized basic principles about savings and investing. And most probably that some of you have already known some of this stuff and you are already doing it in your personal life, which is wonderful. And you might see some things that are a little bit new to you as well. Now, of course, in 1 hour on savings and investing and 1 hour on estate planning and wills, we barely can scratch the surface of these two huge, widely desired topics, but we'll try to have a framework, a conceptual framework on these two topics and go from it. So the very first question I'd like to ask is, how do we save and how do we invest? What do you think? What is saving? What is investing? And of course, I understand that these two concepts could be dealt with in a separate way, but we don't have so much time, so we kind of combine them, and we'll spend a first half hour on savings and then in the second half hour on investing. But what do you think? What is saving? Putting money aside for a rainy fund, right? There's always a rain, especially in Montana. There is rain. Sometimes we don't have enough of it, but sometimes when it comes, it pours. What else? How else can we think about savings or investing to that extent? Yes, for the investing side of it. But basically, when we think about savings, we think about a process of long-term responsibility, if you will. Most of the people who I've talked with, they believe in, some of us have this erroneous idea that savings is all about money, and it's not. And plenty of professionals in the finance industry approach savings. I went online today and I did a lot of research just to make sure that I have my bases covered for this presentation. And I've looked through various philosophical definitions and practical tips and everything else about savings and investing. And 99% of the information that has come through had to deal with tips or pragmatic ideas about how to save money, monetary units, for a particular future or present or a project. And I was thinking, wow, that's pretty cool. That's a very pragmatic approach to savings. But savings also has a component that is behavioral or psycho-emotional in nature. Don't you think so? Why would it be then, if it's not true, if this idea is not true, this notion is not true, then why is it that 50% of people who are ready to retire do not have enough retirement savings, for example? Or why is it that most of us Americans cannot cover a $500, let alone a $1,000 emergency fund? Isn't that a behavioral issue? Isn't that a psycho-emotional thing? What is it? Because if we wouldn't have that component in the savings idea or notion, then we would have money galore set aside, because we know, as adults, as responsible adults, we know that money set aside today, it's going to be able to be spent in the future at some point. And yet we know that that is the basic idea of savings, and we know that that's what we should do, but at least half of us ready for retirement don't do that anyways. Right now, the average sum in a retirement account, for example, when it comes to saving, is less than $50,000. People say that you need anywhere, depending on your target retirement date, you need at least between $500,000 to $1.5 million to retire and have an adequate lifestyle, if you will. Now, which one of you is having $1.5 million sitting around in your bank account? You don't have to answer that. That's just a rhetorical question, okay? It's just a rhetorical question. So you see, savings, when it comes to savings and investing, it's very important to approach this subject not only from a financial standpoint, but also from a behavioral standpoint, because if we don't look at that this way, then we are missing a very important thing, and specifically, why aren't we inclined to save and to do the right things so we can reap the benefits later on in our retirement, for example? So I'd like to have that approach in mind. And also, one of the biggest things that I've been convinced when I did the research for this financial literacy program is that the biggest killer for financial peace, and of course I know that Dave Ramsey copyrighted this financial peace thing. I'm not talking about his particular program. I'm just talking about the notion of having peace when it comes to finance. The biggest issue is debt accumulation. So because of that, I'd like you to think about, when you think about savings and investing, the very first torpedo that could derail your plans when it comes to savings and investing is debt. If you have debt on average, you will not be able to expand your savings and investing strategy. Some of the millionaires and billionaires that have been interviewed over the past several decades have been asked, okay, what would be your advice to people who are starting off, or what would be your best idea of how to build wealth in the long term? And they never said necessarily that it's investing and saving is the best thing. It was always surprising to say most of them said, do not have debt, period. Because if you think about it very pragmatically, where is your source for investing and savings? What is it from? Your income, right? Your salary, your self-employment wages, or your Social Security if you're retired, or you're hitting the millionaire pot with the lottery, or whatever the alternative means of producing money, as long as it's legal. So your source of income is the biggest generator for savings and investing in the long term. So if your source of income is the one that produces the savings, but you already have that source of income pledged as a collateral for your future spending and future earnings, then how can you accumulate any savings and investing? Because basically what we do right now, as we have seen in the earlier presentations, according to the Wall Street Journal, 70% of us live paycheck to paycheck. According to CNN Money, 78% of us live paycheck to paycheck, which means that there's very little margin for error when it comes to financial sustainability in the long run. So think about it. Why is it that we live paycheck to paycheck? Well, if you take away the environmental factors, which are political in nature and economical in nature, like we have a big depression, economy goes south, those are environmental factors. You can't control some of those aspects. So when we come back to the other thing, the behavioral issue on our end, which means I can control to some extent how I spend my money, how I save my money, what I do with my money. If you come back to that particular time, then you want to save the money, but wait a second. I have a car payment that is on average $479 today in North America. So that's the average car payment according to Edmunds.com, one of the biggest car company online retailers, if you will, that sells cars and deals with cars and all that, Edmund.com. So they said $479 on average a car payment in North America. So if you make on average here in Montana, and we kind of debated if we, on average, if we make $20,000 or between $20,000 and $40,000 on average, think about it. If you make about $2,000 to $3,000 a month, and you already, there you go, taxes come off of that, and which is anywhere between 15 to 25% on taxes. You take that away, okay? Then you take another payment for a car payment, which is $479 on average. And then you take your mortgage, which is anywhere between $700 to $1,000. Then you factor in property taxes, which is also quite substantial depending on where you live. And then you factor in your groceries, and then you factor in your gas. Then you factor in so many other payments, such as American Express or Visa or MasterCard credit that was extended to you, and you have to pay it back in a monthly installment. And then you put on top of that interest rate. So the bottom line is there's so many entities, there are so many tributaries that are having a name on your dollar. It is almost insane. So by the time you come to the, how many, we talked about this a little bit in the budgeting session. I asked you about what is a budget, and then somebody said, well, the budgeting process is money that is left over after every dollar is called. I can't afford to budget because I have no leftover, right? You remember that particular comment the other night? Well, think about it. How do you save if every dollar already has a name and somebody's asking for it? You don't. So you see, this is the reason why I personally believe that savings and investing, beside the pragmatic a financial or pragmatic economic component to it, it also has an emotional or behavioral aspect to it. And it's not easy to break that, but perhaps one of the most pragmatic things to do as a first step in that particular territory is to have no debt, period. Now, again, we talked a little bit about this earlier. It is very difficult not to have debt in our society because you buy your house on credit and a lot of different things. So I'm not here to tell you that you have to all of a sudden dump everything. You have to start somewhere. If you have already debt, then we have to come with a plan of action that will reduce, diminish, and eventually eliminate that particular debt load, and eventually start somewhere and go on from there. So don't despair if you already have debt. But for some of you who do not have any debt, that's a good news, because then think about it, out of that list that we have come up, out of our income, if we don't have a car payment, if our house is paid for, or if we don't have credit card payments, or if we don't have ancillary fees that are asked for, then all that money can go to savings. All that money can go into investing. And that's how you basically get ahead in life. That's how you make a little bit of a traction, if you will. So that's why the very first thing that I'd like to stress is have no debt. So the first thing, before you even start investing or savings, and there's one particular exception, the emergency fund, we'll get to that point in a little bit, but beyond that is one exception to the emergency fund, we should always pay off any debt that we have before savings and investing. This is not advice, this is just my personal opinion, but it is being echoed by very much quite a few financial professionals from the very much academic side of the professionals strata all the way to the newfound financial gurus that are peddling whatever for a fee. Okay, so on either side of the spectrum, people say, and it's a very good advice, get rid of debt as soon as you can. Now that means for some of us a couple of months, because we're more conservative. That means for some of us 24 months or 36 months. It doesn't make any difference, but have a plan and get rid of debt. Because once you get rid of debt, that you're free, you're kind of like a free bird. You rise up like phoenix from nowhere, from the ashes, and then you can go and build your future. And it's never too late. It's never too late. So no debt, that's the very first thing. So 5 easy steps how to save. Look at this. First, you have to set a goal. Let's assume that you have taken that courageous step and say no to debt, no to more consumer debt. You have a plan in place. You are making payments, and you have already chosen a strategy, either the snowball strategy that you pay the smallest debt to the highest, and then you conquer one at a time and you knock it off and you move on, or you do the ladder strategy, which means that you take the debt that you have the highest interest charged upon and you pay that off, and then you go on down and down and down and you pay that off. So whichever it is, you already have paid off your debt. Now you have a little bit of extra money. And I made this calculation the other day with some of you, just on a fictitious budget that was $3,500 in nature, and we came up on average, and we were very, very conservative with our debt load. It was about $700 to $900 of savings if you don't have any debts. And that debt load contained credit cards, car payments, and a few ancillary fees that are pretty normal in the average population out there. So think about it. What would you do with the $600 to $900 extra money that you don't have to spend anymore? And that's on the low side. That is just phenomenal. I mean, it just gives you this tingling sensation of freedom that you have never sensed before. I mean, do you know how cool it is that you have your paycheck or your salary, or whatever it is, and or your Social Security or whatnot, whatever the source of income, and then you sit down and say, hey, I don't have to pay that bill anymore. Ka-ching. That goes into my savings. And then you go next, well, wait a second. This month, for the first time ever, I don't have any more credit card payments. No more fees, no more overdraft protection fees because I didn't have enough cash in a bank account. I mean, I don't even know how, and I'm not trying to be unpolite here, but the amount of stress calcifies our bones and our souls to the tune of desperation sometimes when we have so much debt that we can't even a handle. And think about that being taken off. Now you can set goals. Now, when we set goals for savings and investing, you have to think about several different planes, if you will. You have always those small, quick goals that you want to satisfy, and then you have midterm goals and you have long-term goals, and you have to kind of think about this in a strategic matter. Savings, it doesn't mean that you put $25 or $100 or X amount of dollars under your mattress or in your bank account and you leave it there and sit there for X amount of years. That's not savings. That is just a baby step towards getting you to really good savings, and we'll talk about it later a little bit. But for example, short-term goals could be anything between 1 or 3 months. Okay, and some of the examples for that is paying down debt. Let's say you have listened to this seminar and you have been convicted, boy, I don't really want to live anymore in debt. I'm done. I'm just really shaken to the core because I realize that about $600 to $900 is going out on nothing and making someone else very wealthy, which is totally fine, but I'm not going to be one of them. So then one of your short-term goals in terms of savings and investing is to pay off that debt. And you might think, well, how is paying off debt savings? Well, think about it. If you have an average credit card, the other day, and I'll tell you about this a little bit later in a different slide, but the other day, this credit card company sent me a credit offer, and they said, you know what, I will give you $70, another one gave me $200, free of charge. You should just open up this credit card company, this credit card. It was one retailer that is the largest retailer on the planet in terms of e-commerce. So you know which one it is, right? So they sent me an offer. If I open up a credit card with them, they'll give me $70 for free. And I said, okay, thank you. I'll take that. So they sent me the card. I got the money. And guess what I did next? I closed the card last night. It was legal. There was nothing illegal about it. They gave it to you. Okay, and it was so wonderful to see that you can win a little bit with those numbers, right? Now, you can do that if you have self-control and if you don't go and buy something else on that card. Okay, I don't advise this for everybody, and you have to kind of be careful because you also damage a little bit, a couple of points on the credit score and whatnot. But those are some of the things that you can think about it. But when it comes to the short-term goals, paying down debt is an investment, in my personal opinion, because they don't charge you interest. This credit card that was extended to me had a 20% interest. Most of my credit cards are between 8% or 9%, between 8 and 12%. That's the average for my particular situation. And I was thinking, I was a little bit taken aback. So 20% interest, that's horrible. And I did some more research and I realized that's even in the middle. There are credit cards that have 27% interest and 29% interest. Now think about that. $30 out of every $100 goes into interest that you have to pay in debt. So that means if you pay off debt earlier and quicker, then you save yourself that interest, that amounting interest over X amount of time. So you are actually saving because no bank in this particular environment gives you 30% on your money. Not even the stock market gives you that much. So when you pay off debt and you save interest, you're basically investing in yourself to some extent. I know it's kind of like a distorted notion, but it's true because you don't have to pay that interest over the long run. So what about a midterm goal? Well, a good midterm goal could be anywhere between 1 to 5 years, and this is where I personally would say you have to make sure that that emergency fund is funded. Anywhere between $1,000, $500 to $1,000. You have to fund that emergency goal because something will come upon you, and if you don't have the money, then you have to go back into credit cards, which means debt. Because there's very rare that you have more than 21 days of grace when you have to pay back credit cards. You have usually a 0% offer for the first 15 months of the credit card, but after that, you're pretty much done. So what do? One of the midterm goals should be to first fund that $1,000 cash account, which is a quick emergency fund. And then the second goal within this 1 to 5 years midterm goals for savings and investing would be to have a 3 to 6 months worth of expenses emergency fund built up. Now, that's the reason why I'm saying this is the midterm goal, because I know that most of us who are living, about 78% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. So this is a Herculean effort for most of us. But if you think about it a little bit at a time, the hare always loses to the turtle, right? You remember that story? Always. So if you take one step at a time, you can win with money if you save yourself a little bit at a time. So I would say make your calculations, see on piece of paper and write down how much money do I need to live every month. Everything from mortgage to insurance to utility bills to debt servicing to savings to tithe to everything that you have to live for one particular month, and then total that up, and then be very conservative and ask yourself, should I lose my job? You mentioned very eloquently the other night that nobody wants me if I'm more than 50. So ask yourself that question. Experts usually say 3 to 6 months of expenses worth needs to be saved. But I'm even more conservative. I would say, okay, so if I'm 50, or if I'm 60, or if I'm 40, what is the likelihood that an extended period of unemployment will come upon my family? Well, very high if I lose my job. So if that question is answered, then the next question should be, so what is the likelihood that I will get a job in the next 4 months or next 6 months? Based on my environment, my geography, my economic output in my particular town, I would have to ask those questions myself. If I see that potentially it will take me a year to find another job, then I would have to amass 1 year's worth of economic protection for myself and my family. So this 3 to 6 months is an arbitrary number, and it's a fairly decent number if you want to. It's a start. But what if you live in small town America? What if you live in a society where employment opportunities are very, very minuscule? There aren't a lot of employers, and those who do know, and where there's employment, they know that there's a very good competition for those particular few jobs, and then the wages are pressured downwards. So instead of having a job that pays, let's say, $15, $20 an hour, you will have to go to work for 12, 13, which is better than nothing, but it's still a very struggling wage sometimes. Think about it. So when it comes to the midterm goals and savings for the extended period of time, I would start with 3 to 6 months first, but then I also would go to the next step and ask myself these economic questions that I already mentioned to see what is the likelihood, what is the safety net that I need to have in place should I lose my job, or should I have a disability, for example. What if you work with aluminum products and the torch kind of jumps up at you, or an aluminum hits you in the head, or something like that, right? And then all of a sudden you're disabled for the next couple of years. So when it comes to savings, a very sane and very thinking approach is the best way to go. Now, you could start with the 3 to 6 months, but think about it. Now, long-term goals would be 5 to 10 to 20 years. And here you have to think about retirement, you have to think about estate planning, and you have to think about legacy and gifting and philanthropy, and we'll get to that in a little bit. So these are the goals, the 3 set of goals that you should probably start thinking and formulating within your mind. And when you do this, you have to be very realistic in forming these goals. You can't say, if you're in debt to $20,000 all of a sudden, okay, in 5 months I want to take care of my debt. Is it possible? How long did it take you to get into that particular situation? Well, it depends on personal situation, right? It could be that you have accumulated that particular debt load over a span of 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and then it's going to take you probably 2, 3, 4, 5 years to unload that debt, that liability. So be very realistic, but I would make a budget. The same way I would make a budget for my household, I would make a budget for my debt decoupling or deleveraging, as some of the professionals might like to do it. Leverage is a fancy term to being a slave, period. Leverage means that you're so over-borrowed, over-capacitated with borrowing that you're very, very leveraged, and you have to shed assets. That's what the term in the financial parlance. You have to shed assets or you have to sell assets at fire sale prices, which will diminish your potential for wealth in the future. So you have to make a budget for your decoupling of your leverage or your debt that is very measurable and is very achievable. Kind of think it through. You have to kind of be very pragmatic when it comes to these particular situations. How long did it take me to get here, or how long till I have the retirement? I made a calculation the other day. I told you this several times in the past. I have about 27 years to go to retirement. I did some research on Social Security today again, and it looks like if they don't raise the bar again, I would be able to retire at 67. But that's probably unreasonable, because by the time I have to retire, probably the retirement age will be 69 or 70. So I'm not going to hold my breath so far yet. But the issue is that I'm going to have about, give or take, 25, 30 years to retirement. And if you make some calculations about inflation, prices, and whatnot, they say that you have to get between 1.6 and 2.8 million dollars to be able to retire okay. Now, these are not my numbers. These are some, you just punch in calculation in a financial calculator, some numbers. When do you want to retire? What's your target goal? What's your lifestyle want it to be at that particular time? What's your income going to be? So there's some numbers, you punch them in, and they spit up some numbers for you, okay? And some of your goals might be loftier. You really want to drive that Lexus or whatever. I don't. I'm okay with the Triumph, right? There you go. But the point in here is that you have to approach with this a lot of sanity, and you think about it in the future. If I want to retire in 25 years, in 10 years, in whatever number of years, will I have the ability to sustain my life at that particular time? And if I don't have the savings, we'll talk about this in a retirement section of our second lecture here. But if I don't have the savings to sustain that lifestyle, what am I going to do? What will you do? Are you going to eat Alpo and go out to the local store every triple coupon Thursday or something like that? Albertsons doesn't take any coupons anymore. Or do they? I think they've done away with. So think about this. There also has to be an accountability system in place. Accountability is very, very important. If you can't drag your wife or your husband or your spouse into this together, it's not going to happen. And this is where the psycho-emotional or the behavioral part of things come in, because if somebody likes to spend money and they don't think about the future, then it's going to be very difficult to retire on a particular good note where you could have a fairly decent quality of life in the future. And not a lot of us like to think about that, because it's not in our culture. We have this culture where is worshiping youth and vitality and sexiness and all this kind of stuff. And every time when you think about old, and you think about, some people have the erroneous notion that that's decrepit and obsolete, and it's not good. That's the reason why we have notions like that if you pass a certain age, you're not employable, or you're not as good in employment, right? And that's not good. It's not a societal attitude that we should embrace. But nevertheless, sometimes that is the reality. So then you have to think ahead. You have to be proactive. I'm working on this manuscript for this book, Future Proof, of how do you have to think today to be able to have a chance, not only for you, but your family, your offsprings into the future, because it's going to be a totally different future 20, 30 years from now. I mean, it's already changing. Robotics, artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, the future of healthcare, the economic basis of our society will totally be changed in the future. But if you don't think about it today, very pragmatically, very few will be prepared. The second step that we have to take in order to be able to save and invest is do the same budget approaching as we did for our family finances. You have to budget, because there's so many costs involved in a societal environment in which we live today, that it's very easy to say, I have the money, I mean, it's right there in my emergency drawer, let's go and buy something with it, right? I mean, pizza is an emergency so many times. I mean, this is a really big emergency, and Pepsi next to it, it has to be. I mean, the pizza and Pepsi go together. They're unalienable, if you will. There's an American right. And if you repeat that cycle a few times, you will realize that Alpo is also unalienable in retirement. It's cheaper, right? There's always a price to pay for pretty much everything in society. when I came to America, I learned this aphorism. It says, there's no free lunch. And I was thinking, what in the world? These Americans come up with all these sayings, and I don't really understand. And I was embarrassed to ask other people because I had such a horrible time speaking English. And I was thinking, well, who do I ask? Who do I ask? So it took me years of courage to kind of ask someone finally, hey, what does this mean, there's no free lunch in America? And finally, you know that, right? You guys, we all who are been here around for a while, you know, there's no free lunch. Somebody always pays the price. It might not be you in that particular time, but somebody else paid it for you. And that same circle is going to come around, and you will pay sometimes for somebody else. It's just the way it works. It's so interactive. Our economic system is so interactive that you will have to have a price. If it's not economic, that's an emotional. If it's not emotional, that is environmental from a sustainability standpoint. There's always a price to pay. So you have to budget ahead. You have to budget ahead. You have to budget and make sure that the savings and investing is a line item budget in your savings budget, which means that it's so important that other than God and your family, there's the most important thing in the world. And I'll tell you why. This is very, very serious because so many times, and I'm going to become a little philosophical for a second, please forgive my diatribe here, but this is the thing. We make these statements, oh, there's no way we can get ahead in America. Oh, America is no longer the American dream, it's American nightmare. And we make all these political manifesto type slogans that make no sense sometimes. Yeah, it's not easy in America sometimes. Yeah, sometimes the economic conditions or the political factors kind of put us in the bind and whatnot. But try going to a different country. Try living in a country that makes less than $50 a month. See what the difference is. Try seeing that you have to go. I went to Africa several times, several countries, different countries. I went there on humanitarian missions and dispersed packets and different things for people who were struggling with different problems. And I can never forget that one time when I was in the capital city of Uganda called Kampala, and then we went away to a different village from Kampala, and this little boy, he could have not been about, 3-4 years old, and his mom died of HIV, and his dad left the mother before. So he was by himself, and he was chained to a fence. I have a picture of that. I'll show it to you sometimes. It's very, very morbid. And this little kid was chained to a fence, the chain-linked fence, with a steel post in the ground, and he was there, and the rope around his ankle was intertwined with his flesh. I am not making this up. It was one of the most horrific experiences of my life because I realized how big the difference between different geographical regions there is. And I asked the lady who was in charge of him, she was an aunt that was taking him, well, what's the story with the kid? Well, we kind of had to do this because I have to go to work to make a living too, but there's nobody else who can watch him. We don't have a babysitter. There's a babysitting is kind of like an American thing, okay? And what do? Well, we have to do something with him. And then, of course, we made sure we left money and we tried to embrace this kid and whatnot. But it was such a ferocious difference in between my culture, the American culture, where I could come home to the safety and comfort of my bedroom community, suburban household, and I can sit down and I can have a nice little cup of hot cocoa, and I don't have to think about the indecencies of the world, while in the same time, in different time zones, somebody else is struggling. So it is heart-wrenching to some extent. But here in America, you can still do well. And it is still a place where if you have a little bit of determination, and of course I'm going to close with this diatribe here, but if you want to, and if you think ahead, and if you prioritize, and if you have that little bit of oomph, you can get ahead slowly sometimes a little more rapidly, but you can get it done. So you have to make sure that savings and investing is part of your line item budgeting. And this is why this is so important, because if you don't budget, you can't save. If you can't save, you won't be able to get ahead. If you can't get ahead, you are conditioning yourself and your family to the same social strata for generations to come. Social mobility will be drastically erased if you don't think ahead of your time, at least 40, 50 years. You have to ask yourself, okay, not what I'm going to be able to do tomorrow. This is the big difference between people who are getting wealthy sometimes, not always, but most of the times, and those of us, the rest of us who think about tomorrow. And I know it's very difficult when you don't have a lot of money to think, okay, I can't afford this, I can't think about the future. But if you make small steps, and if you do some of the steps that we're talking about, at some point you will make progress, and then you will be able to change not only your present life, but the life of the future generations you are harboring under your wings. This is why budgeting to save is so vitally important. I mean, I can't even stress it how important it is. Automatized savings. You could do this several ways. Some people prefer to save cash. Some people prefer to put it in a savings account. Some people prefer to do it in mutual money accounts. I personally believe that there has to be a balanced approach to this. You have to have some cash, not too much, so nobody can rob you and kill you for it. But then the rest of it, you have to put in a financial vehicle of your choice that is a little bit harder to get, but still very liquid. What I'm saying by that you can't run to the mattress and get the $100 bill out and go buy the pizza really quickly, but you kind of have to wait till Monday for the banks to open, and you open up the deposit box, or if that's where you have them, or perhaps you have to kind of go to the bank and talk to the teller to get it out of your bank account. So put a little bit of a distance between some of your savings and yourself, but still make it liquid enough so you don't have to lose money on it. I wouldn't put it in stocks. We're talking about savings, okay? We're talking about savings, and this savings in terms of 3 months to 6 months, and we're talking about emergency funds. Those are the two components I'm talking about now. We're not talking about investing. Investing is a different breed there for a little bit. So automatize the savings in the way, if you have a salary coming out, then you make sure that you tell your employer, I want to put 5%, 10%, 1%, 20%, whatever the case might be, away, and I don't really want even to see it. It's just going to go directly into my savings account or whatever financial vehicle that you have set up with. If you do it that way, you will not miss that money, because that money does not exist for you right now. Okay? It's very, very important to automatize that. Now, 3, this is the emergency fund. This is very, very important. If you're not having a lot of money, try to start slow and build it up. $20, $40, $60 a month, whatever it takes. Or $5 if that's what you can afford. It doesn't make a difference how much. We are talking psychology to some extent here. We want to develop a new habit in which we are trending a new course in our life's chapter. When you're broke and when you have debt for X amount of years, we are conditioning ourselves to a total financial servitude, and it becomes so second nature to us that we don't even think about it. Oh yeah, I had to pay another fine, $27 because I was overdrawn. That's not a big deal. $27 is not that big deal. But what if you calculate how many $27 have you paid in the past 5 years? All of a sudden that money becomes very important. You see, you have to think about this pragmatically and in long terms, that you do not want to be docile anymore when it comes to financial stability and financial savings. So start small, have $500 or $1,000, that's the emergency fund. And of course, we already talked about the 3 to 6 months expense. Plus, I personally like to think about it in the longer terms. Ask yourself those questions that I said earlier about the economic opportunities, about how lengthy would be the time to be able to get back in the job market and whatnot, and make these things non-negotiable. An emergency fund, the first 1,000, and then the 3 to 6 months, or even longer, those are non-negotiables. They have to be so sacred as breathing air in your life from now on. If you don't make it, you have to be really, really, really adamant about this, because this is the only thing that will change your life. And I keep saying this, and I'm a little bit passionate about this, because so many times I say, oh, well, how can I change my life? Or how can I do this? Well, try slowly, because nobody's going to help you. We know we're neighborly and we're friendly and we're a good country and all that, but we also know about the rugged individualism in this country. We are going to help people in need when we have to, but everybody kind of expects, okay, do your part as well, right? You have to kind of get on your feet and get it done and move on and so on. That's how this country was built, period. So you have to make sure that you talk to your family From now on, we're saving because I wanted to be responsible enough and I care enough about you, my wife or my spouse, and you, my son or my daughter, that I don't want you to ask yourself 20 years down the road, Dad, Mom, why didn't you do this? Or why aren't we in a different level, financially speaking? Why are we perpetually in debt? Why aren't we having the basic savings so we can afford the basic necessities? Think about as a parent. I mean, it would be excruciating for my son or my daughter to come to you or to me and ask, Dad, why can we do this? Well, because we can afford it. Well, why can we afford it? Well, we have a big lawn, we have a big car, we have a big this, we have pizza and Pepsi all the time or whatnot. I'm just using up cliches. I know not everybody acts like this, but the point is make it non-negotiable. And then use some of the very important and legal avenues in which you can get ahead. IRAs, 401ks, 403bs, Roth IRAs. I mean, you know what the difference between these are, right? 401ks and 403bs are basically government-sanctioned shelters in which you can put your money away and you're not taxed on it, and you can defer the taxation on it, and you can make money. So basically every month, your employer says, if you would be willing to put aside $100, I'll put another $100 away for you. Now, most of the people who are salaried, they have 401ks. Schools and nonprofits, we have 403bs as a retirement vehicle. So what we do, first, the employer gives you free money for free. And they say usually about anywhere to 2 to 5%, depending on how magnanimous they feel and how important they think that you are for them. But think about it, that is 3 to 5% free money. So that's the basis. And then they say, if you put in another 2% or 3%, then I will match that again with another 2 or 3%. And they have different numbers depending on the company and the stability of their fiscal responsibilities and all that. But think about, so all of a sudden, if you don't even do anything else, just do the minimum, every single month you would be able to save anywhere between 5 to 10% of your monthly income in savings. And your part of that would be only about 2 to 3%. So think about it. Every $1,000 you have, automatically, if you do this one thing, you match your employee's contributions, you will have $100 every month going away into savings. Which means, and this is the cool thing about this, is that it's not tax dollars. So for example, you can put all those dollars in these 401ks, 403bs, IRAs, and whatnot, and you can do that with pre-tax dollars. Which means that if you put $1,000, for example, there's an amount of limit where every year how much you can put in, but the government will not tax you on those dollars at all. So that's the beauty of this, because that money, so let's say you make $10,000 a year or $20,000, and then you decide to put $5,000 into these savings accounts, government-allowed savings accounts, called IRAs and whatnot, you will only be charged tax on $15,000 and not the $20,000 if you put $5,000 away, which will bring down your tax liability or your tax burden substantially. And when you use deductions, automatic or schedule deductions, you can lower your taxes substantially just by that one thing. Rich people use this all the time. I mean, you heard the famous Warren Buffett saying, I pay less money in taxes from a percentage-wise than my secretary does. And why? Because they use these shelters and whatnot. And of course, there's a lot of different avenues how they can do that. But this is very, very important. The very first thing that you can do is to save after the emergency funds, the two that I've mentioned. You have to max out your contributions that are allowed by your employers. This is the first thing because it's cheap, it doesn't cost you a lot, and it's legal and it's not taxed. Now, these are pre-taxed. And of course, there's a second avenue. After you are maxing out, if you max out your 401ks and whatnot, 403bs, then you have a second avenue, Roth IRAs. Roth IRAs basically are the same vehicle. You can still put away money into retirement later on, and you cannot access these funds till 59 and a half years old. If you do that earlier, it will be taxed, a penalty, and you will have to pay tax on that. But the cool thing is that when you, with the first one, with the 401k and the 403bs and IRAs, regular IRAs, you will be taxed at the end when you retire, okay? But with the Roth IRAs, for example, you will be using post-tax dollars, which means, let's stick with the same example of $20,000. You make $20,000 a year, you put $5,000 in pre-tax dollars into some of these vehicles that I've mentioned, and you have remaining $15,000. Let's say you live in $10,000 only a year, and you still have $5,000 to save, and you want to put it in retirement. Well, you take that $5,000, and now you put it in a Roth IRA, which means that that money was already taxed, and at the end time, when you retire 50 year, at 58 and 59 and a half or whatever you want to, then those monies will never be taxed because those have been pre-taxed when you invested them. So there's several different mechanisms you can play with. Now, of course, you have to hire an accountant or a tax professional and see which tax bracket will you be when you retire. If you will make a lot of money, then you have to consider which one is a better thing. Will it be better to put more money into Roth IRAs because then there's no tax at the end and when you cash out? Or if you make less money, then you could probably do the 401ks, the traditional ones, because then you don't get taxed. So you have to consult your tax and a tax professional and accountant to see which one is a better particular situation for you. But these are cool stuff, cool avenues, because the government allows you to do that. Basically, they are encouraging you to save money because that is good for the economy too. I mean, less programs, the government has to run less programs to keep its society afloat if everybody's having more resources in the end. Now, insurance is very, very important. Extremely important. Disability insurance or long-term care insurance or nursing home insurance or life insurance or term life insurance. These, I'm not going to go too deeply into them because I don't want to, because of sake of time. We already have very little time, but consult one of these insurance professionals and try to find a good one. I'm not saying that everybody's out is not good, but there's something that's called the fiduciary responsibility. And sometimes some of these people that are selling products, let it be insurance or whatnot, they work either on a flat fee or they work on a commission base. If it's a flat fee, that is your best friend when it comes to a financial advisor to help you craft a plan, because they have the fiduciary responsibility, which means that they have to do by law what is best for your particular situation. Now, sometimes when you have a person who is working on commission, they might peddle you and they might sell you things that you don't really need, but they do that because on the back end, they get a really, really good commission on it. And usually sometimes the first year or first year and a half, depending on the structure of the insurance product, they might take that first or second year income that the insurance company gets and they give it almost entirely to the person who made the deal for them, which is the insurance agent. So think about that a little bit. I'm not saying that this is bad. I'm just saying think about it. Shop for insurance. Look around for somebody who is reputable, and look ask them that question. Do you work on a fee basis? Do you work on a commission basis? Because then that kind of tells you where the fiduciary responsibility is, if it's in your favor or not. Number 4, do the numbers. This is very, very, very important. Think now, like I said earlier, into the future. How much income do I have to have in the future to be able to live comfortably and not have to tremble? Think about that. And start small and increase over time the amount of money you save. Okay? For example, if you are late and you don't have any savings, 20 to 30% would be the best. But if you don't have the income and you have the debt, it's not reliable. I mean, it's not going to happen. Usually people right now, if they have 20 or 30 time horizons, they save between 5 to 10% of their income. I think that's a little too slow. But again, you have to have everything in perspective. When you have a lot of debt and you have a lot of liabilities, anything that you can save is better than nothing. There are some studies that have shown us that some of the people of other cultures, such as the Japanese, the Chinese, and the German people, their savings rate in just a few recent years were as high as 46%. Think about that. That means that 46% or $46 of every $100 were saved. Now, this is a generalization. Not everybody does that. There's some who do more. There's some who do less. But the point is, if you want to, and these are entire societies that have done, I think that the latest numbers from Germany were about 26 or 27%, which is an astounding number if you think about it. Our numbers, the American numbers, which in the Great Recession we were negative a percent or two, which means that we were living way beyond our means and we had almost 0% savings rates. We were in a negative. Now we came up, now we're about 3% or so, but even then, just do the math. You see, when it comes to savings and investing, a sane mind wins the game. Do the math. How much money do I need to have for the future to be able to do this? If I'm going to only save at a clip of 3% a year, will that be enough? Well, I'll tell you something. Inflation on average, either official or unofficial, is between 2 and 3%. I know that official inflation right now we're saying that's about 2%, but sometimes it's even higher. I mean, have you gone to the grocery store lately and see how much cent-wise things have increased? And if you do the calculation, let's say you always bought the same product for X amount of time, and you know that something costs $2 and now it's $2.99. Well, what's the increase on that? What's the inflation rate on that? 50%, yeah. So you tell me that there's inflation for 2%? Come on. I mean, I know that the official inflation rate is 2%, whatnot, but some of the things that we have to purchase have gone up in price more than 2% or 3%. So then basically the purchasing power of your dollar is drastically devalued. So if you save only 3% on average for retirement or in savings and whatnot, then your dollar amount will be worth almost nothing 25 years from now. Or you will be in square one. You're going to be on the same thing. I think one of you, Ed, mentioned the other day, if you buy a house for $200,000 and you pay $600,000 by the time you mature the loan in 30 years, and you can sell it in the future for more than $200,000, what does that mean? Well, your value has been eaten up by inflation. So think about these numbers and make sure that you understand that if you only do the minimum, that's not going to get you too far. You have to be aggressive. You have to be a pit bull. You say, you know what? I'm just going to change the way my generation will be from now on. Or the next generation, or whatever, right? Think about these things. And then scrutinize your budget and find savings. There's always something to be cut. There's always something to be cut from your budget. It's just a matter of perception and behavior. Okay, let's go with the next one. And the final point here is the behavioral spending. Now, like I mentioned earlier, savings and investing has a behavioral component. It has. Because if not, why would you be in debt? I mean, other than there's a few major caveats, and we have to be realistic. If you lose your job because of not of your own fault, or if you have a medical condition and you have to go to and have medical care, and all of a sudden you're stuck with a huge bill, or if, for example, your wife or husband leaves you and the divorce proceedings eat up pretty much everything, all your resources, that's not your fault. So it's obvious that there are some environmental issues that, financially speaking, that are not of your own doing and your own choice. But there's plenty that you and I can change. Don't tell me that it's not possible or we do everything right, because that's not always the case. And I'm not trying to be mean here. I'm just trying to be very realistic and say, you know what, let's do our part. Whatever we can do, even if it's a tiny, small thing, because small things tend to grow in big, huge, beautiful trees. So some of the behavioral things that we can do, and this is just a very quick tips that we're going to run through. Don't shop hungry. You know that, right? That's very, it's kind of like a cliche, but don't do it. Cut the cable or cut the TV. I was very curious to see, because everybody's peddling this cliche. Okay, cut the cable, cut the cable, cut the cable. And I don't have cable, I don't have TV at home. So I was very curious, how much does a cable package cost? these days that everybody says cut the cable. So I went online and looked it up. Do you have any idea what an average TV package costs for cable? $8 a month. It's actually $125. So, but think about it. Let's just stick with the small estimation, the $80. $80 a month. In 10 months, that's $800. In a year, that's over $1,000. I mean, and that's cable, which is entertainment. Do you really, I mean, let's just make it this really open. Do I really have the perspicacity, the frame of mind to think about and watch $1,000 worth of entertainment, and my child does not have a college education fund? Do I really want to blow $1,000 on one thing on TV when I don't have an emergency fund, and if I lose my job, my kid could be on a street because I lose my home? I mean, I'm not trying to be morbid here, but just think, we have to kind of think about these things. And I know that we like our entertainment. An average American spends about four hours a day on TV or internet or video games or some sort of entertainment-related activity. Now think about it. Do we really want to do that to our children and the next generation? So, and what could you do? If I would tell you, I'll give you $1,000 today, what would you do with it? You put in savings? Well, you're the smart cookie. Savings, okay. Savings, you would pay the dump truck, right? Savings, that's good. We're in the right bunch here. But just one simple thing. I just out of curiosity, how many of you guys have cable at home or some sort of a package that you have to pay for TV? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 of you. Now, nobody's going to see you. What's the average that you have to pay a month for it? 50, 60 bucks? $9. Oh, you guys have a good deal then. $9. I got down to $29. Oh, you have it down to $29. Okay. So think about those things. There are so many avenues that you can get free entertainment. And I'm not saying that you have to become a pauper or a person who does not have any fun in life, because if you don't have fun in life, that's not cool either. You have to have some fun, because we're going to die and we'll be for eternity with no fun in the grave. But there's so many cheap and free and easy avenues. I mean, you go online and there's free movies. If you really want to watch a movie, there's free on the internet, from YouTube to Zulu to Hulu to whatever. It's all free. Period. Right? All right. Make your own gifts instead of buying. I mean, I quit buying gifts anymore for people. It doesn't mean that I'm cheap. It just means I'm putting my family first. Our neighbor gave us a wonderful idea. She said when their kids were small and the kids were playing with all these little things, then the toys, and they forget about it, and she would put them away, and when they would grow a little bit, she would get them out for Christmas and repackage them, and they would give them back to the kids. Yeah, and they didn't know any better. So there you go. There's tons of ways to do this. All right. I will stop right here and we'll take a break. It's about 6 o'clock, and we will take a short break, and then we will continue our presentation in about a few minutes with the second part of this presentation, and then the final part in estate and retirement planning. Well, thank you so much for coming back once again. This is our final presentation in our financial literacy seminar. I'm your host, Andy Radui, and I want to thank so much KQLW LP 97.7, the best radio station in town, but of course, I'm biased as usual. We are going to continue. We left off at the break at the behavioral reasons for spending and savings, and we talked a little bit about the fact that we have to consider some of the behavioral aspects of our financial nature, if you will. and what we can do to stem the tide of spending and start increasing that financial stability via savings and investing. So we mentioned that we don't want to shop hungry, we want to cut the cable, we want to make gifts ourselves instead of buying. And when you do this particular thing, kind of talk to the people around you in your immediate environment, because if you buy someone a gift, that most likely you do that to someone who's significant in your life, a spouse, a friend, someone who you can have a relationship, a social relationship or an emotional relationship, and they will understand. You can tell them, hey, look at this, I'm in a particular situation, I want to save, I want to make sure that my kids are taken care of later on, so thank you so much for understanding. And they will honor that wish, and they will have a newfound respect looking at you because you're honest. Most of us were cocooning in within ourselves, inside of us, and sometimes we keep up with the Joneses, not everybody, but sometimes, and we give this aura of invincibility and stability when it comes to finances, and then we know the statistics, about 78% of us live paycheck to paycheck. So there's no reason to sustain an image that is not accurate and it's not healthy financially for us. Just talk to people and let them know, hey, this is where I am, I'm on a journey, I want to get better. There's nothing wrong. We talk about depression, we talk about suicide, we talk about abuse, we talk about a lot of other taboo subjects. Why wouldn't we be able to talk about finance with those around us who love us and we can trust? Period. It's just, again, one of those things that we can do. All right. The next thing that I'd like to mention is try to instill in our behavior, financial behavior, 24-hour rule and a 30-day rule. What do I mean by that? When it comes to saving, the biggest detractor for savings is spending. Obvious, right? There's no rocket science to this. I know in the back of my mind that I have a couple $1,000s in savings sitting at home on my mattress, but all of a sudden I see this beautiful brand new TV, and I really kind of want it because I'm one of those wonderful little people that I really, really want to have what I want, right? This is just proverbially speaking. And then what do? You buy the TV or you buy whatever product, and then all of a sudden you have your savings depleted. And then you have a medical emergency and you can't cover it because you bought a TV. This is just an example, but it's a realistic example sometimes. The objects might be different and the emergency situation might be different, but the principle still stands. You don't want to spend your savings. So this is the reason why the 24-hour period is, if you see something you really want, you go home and say, okay, I will not buy this thing under any circumstance for the next 24 hours. And you go home and you go and talk with your wife, your husband, and you go back and forth why you should or should not buy this thing. And you wait the cool-off period 24 hours. And if you really, really are courageous and if you really, really care about your financial future, you do a 30-day. A 30-day moratorium on that particular spending. Let's say you want to buy something. Most times, impulse buying is the enemy of savings. How many times have you seen those very peculiar arranged shelves at the checkout counter in any store? And you come and you wait, and it's a long line, and you're kind of bored halfway through, and you don't know, and then you pick up a Mars candy bar, or you pick up an Inquirer magazine, or you pick up this, or you pick up that, and pretty soon you spend another $5 or $6. They know this is research, this is science. They pay heavy, heavy money for displaying their products at their particular strategic points in their stores. They are not just a nilly-willy, nothing. These guys have a lot of science behind how they do their stores. They know impulse buying works. So have a 30-day period, cool off, if you want to buy something big, or if you want to buy anything that involves your savings and investing money. Okay? Invite people over instead of eating out. Don't spend big on kids. I know this is a no-brainer, but how many times have you heard that some people wanted to and I want to make sure that we understand, I'm not saying this disrespectfully. I have 3 children, I adore them. Period. And I struggled with this as a father too. Sometimes when I travel for a living up and down the streets, highways, and I'm here and I'm Roundup and in Billings and whatnot. Sometimes, for example, this past week I haven't seen my kids almost just in the morning when they woke up, because in the morning I prepared for my seminars. In the evening we were here. So you see your children very little, so then their emotional bonding and attachment comes in and say, okay, what can I give them so I can wash away my guilt that I don't spend time with them? And you know what I'm talking about. And if you have a particular type of a job, or if you have a particular situation where you don't see your children, if you have a divorce background, or it doesn't make any difference what the situation is that sometimes we shower our children with different objects that are competing or trying to substitute an emotional issue that has to be medicated in a different way, perhaps. And a lot of people do that. I mean, why do we spend $300-400 for an Xbox or a PlayStation for a child who is like 4 or 5? And I'm not questioning the validity of the purchase. If you want to do it, that's fine. It's your job. It's your right. It's your whatever you want to call it. I'm not questioning the decision. I'm just saying, do I really need to spend $500 on a kid just so he or she knows that I love them? I can go out and play with them, and I can take that $500 and put it in their college fund, period. When our children were born, my wife and I said, okay, any money, if ever they receive from any source, grandma, grandpas, relatives, me, you, my wife, whatever, we will never spend it. We'll put them away for them in a bank account. So they have a couple $100 now. Oops, they are rich kids now. You see? This is how we have to think. We have to think about the future. You have to be responsible financially when it comes to that. Avoid convenience food or fast food. This is convenience food for a reason. And it's very easy to get into this because we don't have the time. You have to go to work in the morning, and you have to come home, you have to clean, you have to do whatever. We have to have domesticated chores, and not a lot of people have a lot of time to cook. So what do? We go to old Mickey D. And I love Mickey D. Actually, I like some stuff from them, like their Frappuccino, or not Frappuccino, Frappe chocolate chip cookie, whatever that is. And I like Subway. Subway is one of my favorites. Mocha Frappe, that's what it is. Subway is they have the vegetarian sandwich. I like vegetarian sandwiches. You go there, you pay your $5.50, and you're good to go. And it's convenient, it's fast, and whatnot. But if you do $5.50 every single day, guess what? It's going to be added up really fast. So you could brown bag sometimes instead of buying that. Okay? So if you want to get ahead with savings, you have to quit your credit cards. Plan your meals, try generic brands, and the most that I like the most, have a visual reminder of two things: your debt load, if you still are in debt, and if you're not in debt, have a visual reminder of how far have you come along when it comes to savings. It is just so cool. There's something so infatuating and so wonderful when you can look at your savings and say, hey, not that you trust your money, because we know that the Lord tells us that money is not a good substitute for stability, but when you know that, let's say you might potentially be in an emergency room situation and you have a couple of $1,000s, you don't have to fret about it. Isn't that a better feeling? And then if you're not anxious and nervous that you're going to lose your job, for example, all of us can be in this game, and because we have all $50,000, because that's how much it takes us to live a year or 2 years, then I don't have to fret about it. I'm going to be nicer. I'm not going to be as stressed. I'm going to be very nicer with my husband, with my wife, with my kids, with my neighbors, with with whoever. And that makes me more social, right? So don't speed tickets. Don't speed because tickets can get expensive. And you might think this is not a big deal, but I know some people like to speed. Because his name is Andrew. I haven't had a ticket in very, very long years. But I got one I was in Minnesota. Oh, that was hurting. That hurt so bad. So I learned that I will not speed beyond 4 miles over the speed limit. Okay, some of these behavioral things that I was mentioning to you, other ones could be eat less, use coupons, exercise more, pay attention to unit cost, and work per hour price per purchase estimation. What does that mean? Well, think about it. would anybody of you guys would think too much about going and buying a $10 food outside, let's say Olive Garden or whatever the case, McDonald's, I don't care where. Just on average, we kind of know that it's about $8 to $10 a plate of food. And that's on the cheap side. If you go to Billings, the Olive Garden, it costs about $14 a plate. Okay, give or take. So you go down to Great Falls or Billings or whatnot and say, hey, I'm not here too often, perhaps only 6 times a year. Let's just go to this restaurant, let's eat because we deserve it. Not a big deal, right? All of us can do that. And especially if we have good savings, we can pay cash for it and we'll forget about it. But let's think about it this way. What if, let's say we think about it this way. It's going to cost me $14 to eat at a particular restaurant. What does that mean in terms of my hourly wages? How much do I have to work for $14?
2 hours.
2 hours. So is it worth for me to work 2 hours for that meal? And some of you might say, yeah, that's okay, I'm okay with that. And that's okay. If you're comfortable with that math, I don't have a problem with that. But sometimes this exercise is really, really good because let's say it's not a meal, let's say it's something else. Let's call it a latte factor, which means that you buy something on a persistent basis and it costs you $4 or $5 a pop. But if you think about it, I have to work for this particular thing an hour or 2 hours. It's really, really worth it for me. And you kind of think again, how many visitations do I have to make? I'm just kidding, right? Or how many tours do I have to make with my truck for that one meal? Or how many aluminum bars or steel bars do I have to solder until I get the money for this meal? Or how much concrete do I have to pour so I can get this money to go to Subway and buy cookies for everybody? A lot, right? So no more cookies next time, guys. You're on your own. Pay for it, people. You see, if you think about it from this perspective, it changes the game a little bit. Now, most importantly, it is very, very important to simplify things. If you don't simplify, it's going to get complicated in a heartbeat because you don't only have to think about your finance. You have to think about your house. You have to think about your kids. You have to think about your wife. You have to think about environment. You have to think about so many different things, and you forget things really quickly. I was speaking yesterday here in this particular environment, and all of a sudden I'm thinking and I'm speaking and I'm loving what I'm doing, and all of a sudden I realized, oh, I have to make sure that prescription doesn't renew, because I have 24 days left, and I remember, is it the 24th or 25th day of that prescription? If I don't cancel it, it's going to charge me $59 on the prescription. And I'm thinking, and I'm presenting, and I'm having this in my mind, simplify it, cut it off. So as soon as I went home, I went online and I canceled my prescription to a particular magazine. Period. And now I don't have to think about it anymore. Right? Love simplicity. I love simplicity. Okay, not the least, but very, very important also, you can save sometimes, but this is a very dangerous game. It's called the credit game. How many times have you been offered a 0% down or a 0% offer for 15 or 21 months from a credit card company? I mean, I get them every week now. Every week. And you open them up and say, okay, you have 0% for 15 months or 21 months, and after that, the interest rate is about 25% or 30% or whatever. And these can be a short-term fix in certain situations with certain people who don't have a predilection for a lot of no self-control, if you will. Okay? Because let's say you have a precise source of income for the next 2 years. Okay? You know exactly that you will not lose your job. You know exactly that nothing is going to change in your environment. You just have this perfect fix, perfect gig for money. That's what it is. So for example, let's say you really like Delta Airlines because they are just an impeccable company, and I don't know if that's true, I'm just picking them as an example, and you just really want to get into it, or you want Apple because Apple is ubiquitous. I mean, there's an iPhone on every street corner, so they make good money. So you want to get into Apple. But Apple used to when I started watching Apple, it used to be $700 almost, 600 and some dollars. So if you don't have a lot of money, then how do you buy into Apple at 600 a share? So what they did, they split the stock 6-1, which means that they gave you, for every one stock that you own in Apple, they gave you 6 other ones. So then they brought the price down to $60, for example, or whatever. So then you were able to get into that market a little cheaper, but they diluted the stock. So basically, when you buy a stock of a company, you are buying a sliver of ownership in that particular company. And based upon your proportional ownership, you will get dividends. That's how you make your money, or you will reap or harvest the benefit of capital gains in that stock. Let's say today you buy an Apple stock for $60, okay? And Apple says, I'm not going to pay a lot of dividend because I want this profit to stay in the company, and I want to do a lot of money, put a lot of money in R&D so we can get the best next iPhone and the best next computer and whatnot. So they don't give you a lot of dividend, but because everybody knows that Apple is a really cool company and they will outsell everybody stratospherically in this particular industry, phones and whatnot, computers, then everybody buys the stock, which means that that stock will appreciate in value. The gain, the market gain will go up. So instead of, let's say 2 months from now when you want to sell, the stock is valued at $80 instead of $60. So the difference, the spread between 60 and 80 is your capital gains. That's what you earn as a profit. Now some other companies like utilities, for example, utilities or other companies, they don't make any exotic iPhone, if you will. All they do, they charge you on a monthly basis for your water, for your garbage, for your gas or whatnot. So then those are very stable. They don't fluctuate in price so high and low and high and low, but they give you a very good dividend. They say, okay, we know 100% that everybody's going to have their trash hauled, or most people. We know that everybody has to use electricity for their houses and electronics and whatnot. So we can we don't guarantee, but the market kind of guarantees a given percentage of a dividend, which is 2%, 3%, 5%, depending on the business, depending on the environment, depending on regulation, and so on. So then you make the profit on that particular stock on a dividend and not necessarily on a capital gains. So when you choose a stock, you have to remember and ask yourself, what do you want to do? Do you want to invest in a company that is a growth company, which will give you money in capital growth or in capital gains? Or do you want to invest in a company that is a dividend company and gives you about 3 to 5% every month, every quarter for sure, or reasonably sure, because nothing is sure in this life? And then do you want to get into a company that's called a blue chip company? A blue chip company is a secured company or a better company because they have a long track record, and it comes actually from poker. In poker, the blue chip is the most valuable chip on the table, for those of you guys who know poker. And because of that, they kind of got into this also, that the good, strong, valuable companies, they don't vacillate that much economically speaking. And they give you dividends. Sometimes blue chip companies such as Ford or Procter & Gamble or AT&T or Verizon, these are very expensive stocks sometimes because of their nature. They are stable, they are secure. For example, Verizon right now trades about $40-some. It used to be $56, but because again, the regulatory and the economic environment has loosened a little bit. There's more money coming on the market, so money is cheap to borrow. Because of that, nobody wants to get into the safety of utility companies, which electronics and telephony is, right? Nobody kind of wants to be in AT&T and Verizon sometimes when you can make a little more profit elsewhere. Verizon and AT&T gives you about 5% anytime in a given quarter. But if you kind of want to go for the exotic and you want to go with startups or growth companies that can accelerate and give you a 16, 17% sometimes, then some people like that risk and they do that. Now, bonds are a different beast, if you will. Bonds are debt instruments. So while for a stock, what you do, you go to the stock and you buy a sliver of ownership. In bonds, you lend your money at an interest rate to the company or the organization that wants your money. Let it be the government, let it be state, let it be local, municipal bonds, whatever it is. A bond is basically a debt owed to you for a particular duration for a particular price. That's what a bond is. So you have municipal bonds, you have government bonds, you have regular corporation bonds, and some of them are more stable, some are less stable, some of them are more precious because of their nature. So you have to kind of think about tax implication a little bit here. Some bonds are taxed more, some are less. Municipal bonds, for example, are not taxed in certain environments. Some are not taxed federally, but only at the state level, and vice versa. There's so many implications to kind of think about that. No leverage. It's very, very, very important to have no leverage, which means when you invest, let it be in stocks or bonds or real estate or precious metals, never do it on borrowed money. That's what no leverage means. Leverage is a very fancy term in the finance industry, in which they say that, well, why not use, for example, buy an option, for example, or borrow some money, and if your price is right, if the economic environment is right, you could make more money, but also you could lose more money also. So we're not going to go into too much on that, but bottom line, I do not advise personally, and I'm not a professional in this, but I wouldn't have the appetite for leverage. I never invested on leverage at all. Okay, a couple of other things on this particular issue. You could also invest in real estate, such as houses, lands, mobile homes, whatnot, but those require an initial capital that is way higher for the entry point than if you would invest in bonds and stocks. Now, if you could buy a mobile home for about $3,000-$5,000, whatnot, and you could rent it out for $600 to $700 a month, and you could have some cash flow there. But you have to consider then the land which upon the mobile homes rest, which is usually $200 to $300. So you see, everything you kind of have to think about. Precious metals. Okay, so if the dollar is devalued, then the precious metals go up, but it's a big risk also. So